Hello, children. Today we are going to start with the next chapter from our English reader, chapter number 6, Gulliver in the land of Lilliput. This chapter has been adapted from Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift. Now, children, did you remember we did the story of Gulliver's Travel in our previous chapter, wherein the author who has written this autobiography had set sail on a voyage, and how his ship was wrecked, it was caught in a storm, and then he just managed to swim to a nearby island, and he felt exhausted and he fell fast asleep. Well, are you curious to find out what happens next? So let us read and find out Gulliver's adventure, where he was shipwrecked in a land of people who were only 6 inches tall. So let us read chapter number 6, Gulliver in the land of Lilliput. I must have slept for about 9 hours, for when I woke up, it was daylight. I tried to get up, but I couldn't move. My arms and legs were tied to pegs fastened into the ground. Thin, strong cords were tied across my body and attached to pegs in the ground. My long hair was spread out and tied down in the same manner. Now, what happened when Gulliver got up? He realized he could not move. And why? Because his arms and legs, they were tied to pegs fastened into the ground. What are pegs? They are those short nails that are used to hold or tie the objects to the ground. They were fixed into the ground. Even his long hair, they were spread out and they were also tied. So he just couldn't move. All I could do was to stare upwards at the sun, blinking to ease the pain on my already strained eyes. Suddenly, I heard strange noises around me, but I couldn't move to find out what they were or where they were coming from. Now, Gulliver, since he couldn't move much, all he could do was just stare upwards at the sun, and then he was so tired just staring up. His eyes were strained, his eyes were tired, his eyes were stressed. He suddenly heard noises. Now he could not get up to see, but only he could hear the noises which were coming from a distance. The next moment, I felt something alive moving on my leg. It progressed over my stomach and onto my chest, stopping just below my chin. I lowered my eyes downwards as much as I could, hoping to see what sort of insect was crawling on me. Then I suddenly gasped, "Why, it's a human creature, barely 6 inches tall." Now, Gulliver felt that there was something which was moving up over him on his stomach, and finally it managed to reach till his chin. Now, since he could not move to see or get up to see what it was, he just could manage to roll his eyes downwards. He probably thought, it was some insect which is crawling up his body, but he was surprised. He was gasped to see that it was not an insect. It was a human creature, and barely 6 inches tall. It was so tiny. This creature had a bow and arrow in his hands and was followed by 40 more creatures like him. I was so surprised that I let out a frightful roar. All the creatures ran helter-skelter and jumped off my body in terror. After some time, they gathered courage and climbed back onto my body. This time, one of them even clambered onto my chin to get a closer look at me. He let out a screech of excitement, "Hekina Digul!" Now, these creatures, they had bow and arrow. Bow and arrow is a weapon. And Lemur realized that there was not just one creature, there were 40 of them. And he got so surprised seeing all of them that he gave a frightful roar. He was frightened. And all the creatures, they ran helter-skelter and jumped off his body in terror. The creatures also, they ran here and there. They got the fear. Now, after the commotion settled, they gathered courage and they climbed back on his body. Now, one of them even clambered. Clambered means when you're climbing with little difficulty. So, one of them managed to climb and reach his chin, and it came so closer to him. And then that little creature, he let out a screech of excitement. Screech means he gave out a shout. He screamed in excitement. And what did he scream? Hekina Digul. Hekina Digul, repeated the crowd after him. I didn't give too much attention to their words. I was more concerned with setting myself free. By twisting and turning and pulling and pushing, I managed to pull out the pegs that were holding my left arm down. With one arm free, I was able to free my hair and turn my head to the right. Now, Gulliver, he could not understand what the word Hekina Digul meant, but then he was not bothered. He was more concerned about setting himself free. So he was trying hard, he was pushing and pulling himself, maybe hoping that some rope will unfasten, and finally he could manage to free one of his arm, and then with that arm he helped himself and he managed to free his hair and he could turn his head to the right direction. There were cries of panic from the little creatures, and suddenly hundreds of tiny arrows hit my left hand, pricking me like hundreds of needles. When arrows began striking my face, I groaned with pain and raised my left hand to protect myself. They also started jabbing spears at my sides. Luckily for me, my jacket was thick and prevented me from getting severely injured. Now the little creatures, they started crying out of panic, out of an uncontrollable fear. So what did they do? They started again aiming their arrows towards Gulliver. Now these arrows, they were pricking him like hundreds of needles. Now a few arrows, they even actually struck on his face. He did try to save himself by using his hand, but still they hurt him, and then he groaned with pain. Means he cried in pain. They also started jabbing spears. Jabbing spears means they were also poking spears, and which as a result were hurting him. But fortunately, Gulliver had a thick jacket on, so it did not really severely injure him. It did not really seriously injure him. I thought to myself that the wisest thing to do would be to lie still until night. So I stopped struggling and the arrows stopped coming. But soon I heard another loud noise near my right ear. It was like a banging, like people at work. I turned as much as I could and saw about 50 of the creatures setting up a platform a foot and a half above the ground. What happened, since he could not do much about it, and if he felt if he was moving too much, they were actually hitting him more. So he thought, okay, let me stop struggling, and then soon the arrows also stopped coming. They were not shooting at him. But suddenly he heard a loud noise like a banging. And what did he see? He turned around and he saw that about 50 of the creatures, those little humans, they were setting up. Setting up means they were constructing something like a platform. What is a platform, children? It is a little raised surface on which people or things can stand. We move on to our next page, page 48. Soon 4 of them climbed up ladders and stood on the platform. In the middle was an important-looking man. He made a long speech looking in my direction, and of course, I didn't understand a word of it. But I could tell from the tone of his voice that some words were threats, other promises, and still other reassurances, especially when he pointed all around and repeated over and over, "Lilliput, Lilliput." Now what happened? The little platform that they made, 4 of them climbed on up with the ladder, and he saw there was a man in the middle, a little important looking, means a little special, a little privileged, a little significant man, and he made a speech. Though he could not understand the language, but he could make out from the tone of his voice that, there were some threats, as if he is warning, giving some warning. Some he felt were promises, and some words appeared as if they were reassurances, they were hopes, they were encouragements. The great Hergo, as I later learned, this important lord was called, understood my signs and shouted out orders to the crowd below. 100 little people immediately placed ladders at my sides and climbed up on my body with baskets full of meat and bread, which they dumped into my mouth. This was the food that their emperor had ordered as soon as he received word of my arrival. When I signaled that I was also thirsty, they rolled a barrel up a ladder and across my chest. Then they poured a delicious liquid that tasted like wine. But their barrel was equal to a cup. And after they had given me a second barrel, they showed me that they had no more. Now, what happened? Gulliver realized that the leader, the important looking person, the lord he was speaking to, was Hergo, and he understood the signs. He understood that Lemur was hungry, so he ordered his people, his little creatures, to go and feed him, and they all got him what? They got them baskets full of meat and bread. And what did they do? They dumped it. They just dropped it into his mouth. Now Gulliver was thirsty as well. So what did they do? They rolled up a barrel. Now children, what is a barrel? A barrel is a large cylindrical container or a drum which can hold up liquid. So they poured the liquid into his mouth. And what did it taste like? It tasted like wine to Gulliver. Now the barrel was only equal to a cup and he wanted to have more. So they had given him a second barrel as well. But after that, they showed that there was no more. I was grateful to these little creatures. They had treated me generously. So Gulliver was feeling grateful to these little creatures because they had treated him generously. They had treated him kindly. They gave him food when he was hungry. They gave him water when he was feeling thirsty. So he felt thankful towards them that they took care. So children, did you enjoy this adventurous journey of Gulliver in the land of Lilliput? Well, do read this chapter at least 2-3 times more. Thank you and have a good day.